welcome to this edition of Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Israel vows a firm response after Yemen's Houthis fired what they claimed was a hypersonic missile at Tel Aviv. Jordan's king names a palace aide as the new prime minister days after the Islamists came out on top in elections. And it's 4 years since Israel and 4 Arab countries signed the Abraham Accords. We look at the prospects of more countries signing up amid the current tensions. First, Israel's Prime Minister has threatened fresh strikes on Yemen's main port after the Houthis fired a ballistic missile at central Israel. The IDF says it's still investigating how air defences failed to intercept the missile, which fell in fragments close to a forest. Israel last struck the port of Hodeidah in July, causing widespread damage. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has the latest.
The Houthis keeping their promises. Iran's Yemeni proxy launched a long-range ballistic missile at central Israel on Sunday morning. Sirens sounded in numerous cities, the IDF said. The missile landed in an open area after multiple interceptors managed to hit the missile, causing it to fall apart midair, only partially intercepting it.
The Yemeni armed forces carried out a special military operation, targeting a military target in the area of Jaffa inside Israel. This operation was executed with a new hypersonic ballistic missile, which successfully reached its target. The enemy's defenses failed to intercept and counter it.
Fallen shrapnel caused damage in multiple areas, including a train station near Modi'in. There were no injuries as a result of the strike or the interception attempts, but 9 people were injured running to shelters.
The missile traveled a distance of 1,260 miles in 11.5 minutes and caused a state of fear and panic among the Zionists, as more than 2 million of them headed to shelters for the first time in the history of the Israeli enemy.
According to the Iranian-backed militia, the attack came in response to a July 20th Israeli airstrike on the port of Hodeidah. 14 people were killed in the strike, and the Houthis vowed to retaliate in a continuous manner.
The enemies will be surprised on land as they were surprised at sea with new and unprecedented technologies. We will spare no effort in supporting the Palestinian people.
This was the third Houthi strike that managed to bypass Israel's multi-layered air defenses. Back in March, a cruise missile landed in an open area near the southern city of Eilat, causing no damage or injuries. And 2 months ago, a drone launched from Yemen exploded on an apartment in Tel Aviv, killing 1 man and wounding 4 others.
We are in a multi-front battle against Iran's axis of evil that strives to destroy us. This morning, the Houthis launched a surface-to-surface missile from Yemen into our territory. They should have known by now that we exact a heavy price for any attempt to harm us. Those who need a reminder in this matter are invited to visit the port of Hodeidah. Anyone who attacks us will not escape from our arms.
After Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel, which were mostly intercepted, Israel boasted at its cutting-edge air defenses. Now, the Houthis have shown that even a single missile can bypass them, raising unease as to the efficacy of Israel's defenses.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Yaakov Lapin is the host of The Lapin Assessment on Patreon. He's also a military and strategic affairs analyst at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate as well. Good to see you, Yaakov. Thank you for joining us tonight. So this missile managed to get past not only Israeli air defences, but also American air defences, significant military assets from the US stationed in the region right now. What happened exactly?
Well, the Israeli Air Force is still investigating this, but it originally stated that the missile was fired at 6:21 this morning from Yemen and was detected coming from the east rather than the south. Now, most of the missiles that the Houthis have been firing, usually targeting Eilat, have been detected from the south. So it looks like the Houthis chose a new route in an effort to try and confuse detection and radar capabilities. So the detection thing is one element of this Israeli Air Force investigation that they're going to have to get to the bottom of. When was it detected? Was it detected too late? And the second thing is the interception phase. What happened there? We still don't know. We're still largely in the dark. We know, based on IDF statements, that the missile fragmented in the middle of its flight as it was over Israeli territory. What caused it to fragment? Was it hit, or did it fragment because it was built badly? Nobody has definitive answers as of now, but certainly this is something that's going to be top priority investigation, and hopefully we'll hear the results the findings very, very soon.
We are still waiting for an official answer on that, aren't we?
Yeah.
What, if anything, does this tell us about the Houthis' military capabilities then at this stage?
Well, I think it tells us that, the Iranians are using the Houthis as a kind of military lab where they are exporting all manner of arms to them, including ballistic missiles. Now, the Houthi claim that this was a hypersonic missile is being treated with deep skepticism by the missile experts I've spoken to today. They think it's much more likely that it was some sort of extended version missile called a Qadr, which the Houthis have been firing regularly at Eilat, and that in itself is a version of the Iranian Shahab-3 missile, which is based on a North Korean design. So people here who live and breathe missiles are not very convinced by this claim. They also say it took about the same amount of time as a normal ballistic missile to cover this distance. But what is clear is that the Iranians are using the Houthis, A, to pressure Israel, to attack Israel as part of the multi-front Iranian strategy, and B, the Iranians get to test out their technology without so far paying a price. And so I think that, when Israel talks about responding, it's important to bear in mind that the Houthis are basically Iranian puppets here, and the people who armed them, trained them, funded them, and ordered them to fire on Israel are sitting in Tehran, not in Yemen.
All right, Yaakov, for now, thank you very much. Well, according to the Houthis, that missile did travel more than 2,000 kilometres from the territory they control in Yemen to central Israel. And as we have just heard, it broke up in the air, but large fragments did fall in multiple locations in central Israel, including in the city of Modin, where we now find our correspondent, Zach Anders. Zach, the Houthis claiming that 2 million Zionists were forced to flee terrified to the shelters this morning. Not quite an accurate picture of what happened, but it was a bit of a shock for some people to wake up to this news, wasn't it?
Definitely a jolt, but what I've been surprised by is we've been here for a few hours. Nobody seems to be talking about it. Nobody seems to be mentioning with any alarm or a surprise. Of course, I don't speak Hebrew very well, but I've been having some folks translate for me, and nobody seems to be talking about it. We were told that, the interesting part about being here in particular is that there haven't been over the course of the war many alarms here, maybe just a handful. So that was certainly a jolt, and a lot of people were asleep at 6:30 in the morning. Tracking that timeline and just following up on what was a really, I was listening just now, that was a really fascinating conversation. Some of the questions that I have myself too about the specifics and the claims, the Houthis saying that was some sort of hypersonic missile. That's been a tough thing to achieve for even modern militaries. China and the U.S. have been struggling to get this technology to succeed for them on their end, hypersonic technology. So that's an interesting point made there, but the timeline for a ballistic missile, that does line up because the IDF says at 6:21 a.m. is when they first picked up that launch. So they had this in their sights the entire way. The alarms don't go off here until 6:30 in the morning, not until the end stages of this ballistic missile's flight. The questions that we have that I don't think we're going to get an answer to very quickly, because from what I've been told by my sources is that some of these questions are trying to work their way up the ladder within the IDF. There's certainly a high degree of expertise needed here for some elements of understanding what happened, but there's a lot of questions that the IDF has themselves as to where did the malfunction or the failure in this process come about. Because the alarms being triggered here as debris are starting to rain down on folks in this area, that's certainly something that needs to be looked at, especially if this was a projectile and a target that the IDF had in their sights for maybe 8 or 9 minutes before it got here, and they would know the trajectory, they would know what the arc of this ballistic missile is looking like, where it's going to land. So not a lot of warning for these people that 9 were injured as they were rushing to get to these shelters here.
All right, Zach, thank you very much indeed. Zach Andrews there in the city of Modin in central Israel. And Yaakov Lapin, perhaps a sign, sadly, that Israelis are becoming far too used to having missiles fired at them on a regular basis from all sorts of Iranian proxies.
Unfortunately, I think that that's true. Months and months of projectile attacks, although we have seen a radical decrease. When I say we, I'm talking about everybody who does not live in that area of northern Israel that is bombarded daily. The reality is starkly different from the rest of the country. But absolutely, as a whole, Israelis have become used to being under missile and rocket fire. And whatever, somebody may want to, think about that, the terrorizing effect that adversaries think that this has on Israelis is really not there for the most part. People have become very reliant on air defenses, which, by the way, is not something to be taken for granted in a future war against Hezbollah, which, at least at the opening stages, we will unfortunately see our air defenses partially overwhelmed. But as of now, and from the start of this war until now, there's no question in my mind that Israelis have become far more used to this kind of attack, know how to deal with it, know how to get on with the rest of their day, and do not go into the kind of panic mode that the Houthis had desired to wish to see.
Yeah, and we will talk a bit more about the prospect of an all-out war with Hezbollah in a moment. But for now, thank you very much, Yaakov. Well, Israel has vowed a harsh response, so presumably the Houthis were anticipating that. Let's talk a bit more about the Houthi strategy now. Emily Milliken is Associate Director at the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much for being with us, Emily. So the Houthis say they will launch more attacks as we approach the anniversary of October 7th. Is this a case of this particular Iranian proxy trying to get themselves back in the spotlight?
For sure. The Houthis have already seen the benefits from these attacks, and they just want more. Their maritime operations and attacks on Israeli territory have generated significant attention for the group, and even international support from countries who see the operations as in support of Palestinians. This gives them this sense of legitimacy on the world stage and even leverage ahead of peace negotiations with the Saudis. At the same time, the attacks bolster their domestic popularity. They distract Yemenis living in Houthi-controlled areas from the group's poor governance, and also act as a powerful recruitment tool for Yemenis who are widely sympathetic to the Palestinians. And the group has even claimed to have recruited over 200,000 new forces since the start of their maritime attacks last year. So they just want more attention. There's no reason that they would stop.
Well, you say that this boosts their support among the population at home. As we know, Yemen is the poorest country in the Arab world already. When they managed to strike Tel Aviv with a missile back in July, Israel responded very harshly and caused significant damage to the port of Hodeidah, which, of course, is Yemen's gateway to the world. That's where a lot of aid comes in, a lot of much-needed aid. I mean, the impoverished population of Yemen will be the ones who pay the price for this, of course, won't they?
Yes, unfortunately, the strike on the port of Hodeidah did cause a lot of damage. It destroyed a power generating station, an oil refinery, port cranes, killed 6 Yemen Petroleum Company workers. However, this was really just symbolic for the Houthis in their operations. It didn't really impact their ability to conduct operations, and it ended up really acting as a net positive for the group because it legitimized their claims that they are at war with Israel. And that's a new powerful recruitment tool. Future IDF strikes, hopefully they would target things like, Houthi leadership or major weapons depots that the group has. But this would probably only inhibit their ability to operate in the short term because the Houthis have proven that they are capable of bouncing back from strikes of these kinds after years of Saudi-led coalition strikes, as well as the recent United States and United Kingdom strikes that have done little to stop them and would really only elevate their status within Iran's axis of resistance.
Interesting. Emily, stay with me. Yaakov, you wanted to weigh in there.
Just to update that we're hearing now from a military official that there was a hit this morning on this missile from an interceptor, and that is what caused it to fragment. So we now have confirmation that there was a hit on this Houthi missile.
So it was intercepted. Any idea why it took so long for the IDF to come out and confirm that?
I think they wanted to get to the bottom of it. It took some time, for the air defense officials to gather the evidence, to make a conclusive finding. It took them several hours to reach a definitive conclusion, but now we have at least that fact that there was a strike on this missile from an air defense interceptor. We don't know which one. Was it an Iron Dome? Was it an arrow? Because both of them were fired at this. But we do know that there was a hit, so there was at least a partial interception of this missile.
OK, yeah, well, thank you. So breaking news this hour, then the IDF has confirmed that it did intercept that missile. Emily, I'll come back to you. How many more missiles do the Houthis have in their arsenal of this? They claim it was a hypersonic missile. We don't know. But do they have a great deal more missiles like this? And we've seen their willingness to fire them.
It's really impossible to determine the exact number of Houthi missiles or the exact makeup of their arsenal due to just lack of intelligence. A lot of these weapons are Iranian in origin or built from Iranian-provided components. And while the U.S. and partners have intercepted some of these weapons, many of them are transported on small Dow boats that go undetected. But we would assume if it is something as advanced that's able to travel over 2,000 kilometers, they have less of these than smaller missiles and drone systems. And I will echo other sentiments that this was probably not a hypersonic missile at this time. Iran has been claiming since November 2022 that it had a system capable of flying at these speeds, and Iranian accounts are now saying that this missile reached speeds of at least Mach 9. At this point, only the United States, China, India, and Russia have developed confirmed hypersonic weapons.
Emily Milliken at the Atlantic Council, thank you. Well, prior to that attack by the Houthis, there were more large anti-government protests here in Tel Aviv last night, with calls for the Prime Minister to do more to free the remaining 101 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. Jody Notilowitz has the story.
9 months after the bodies of Ron Sherman, Nick Bizer, and Elia Toledano were recovered from Gaza, an IDF investigation has confirmed that the 3 former hostages were killed as a result of a, quote, byproduct of an Israeli airstrike. A fact that is sure to add more fuel to the fire in the anger felt by Israelis calling for a ceasefire.
This evening, like every Saturday, we hope that hundreds of thousands will come. Will show sympathizing with the families of the kidnapped.
Once again, thousands of Israelis gathered to attend a weekly protest, calling on the government to secure a deal for the release of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Mass protests have been renewed in the past 2 weeks following the recovery of the bodies of 6 hostages and the release of footage of the tunnel where they were held and later killed. Visuals which have sparked outrage among the families of the hostages who have expressed frustration in the government's negotiations to bring them home.
We were horrified this week when we learned the abysmal, inhuman conditions our hostages who are held in the Hamas tunnels are enduring. What they are going through in captivity is unimaginable. They are dying, locked up in small, unventilated cells, in tunnels deep underground, with no air, malnourished, without seeing the light of day for 11 months.
At the protest, the mother of Matan Angrest, an abducted soldier, played audio of her son addressing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from his captivity in Gaza, his first sign of life since being taken hostage on October 7th.
Netanyahu, אתה חייב לעשות את ההחלפה הזאת בין האסירים בישראל לאסירים פה. אני מאוד רוצה לראות את המשפחה ואת החברים שלי, זה מאוד חשוב. אני חושב שאתה מסוגל לזה, צריך לרצות, אבל אני סומך עליך, אתה יכול לעשות את זה, ומקווה שכמה שיותר בקרוב.
A ceasefire in Gaza that would have included a deal for the release of hostages has not materialized, with Israel and Hamas taking turns blaming each other for the impasse.
Now, with the focus on the activities of Iran's proxies in the region, there is increasing concern about Iran's advancing nuclear program. The United States and the UK saying that they're concerned Russia is directly assisting Tehran with nuclear know-how. For more on that, we're joined by Jason Brodsky. He's the policy director at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Good to see you, Jason. Thank you very much for being with us. So talk us through these concerns. Essentially, the UK and the US are worried that as Iran develops its uranium stockpile, it is now getting direct help from Moscow on how it can build a nuclear weapon. Is that right?
Yes, it's great to be with you, Laura. I think that it's a function of Iran having more leverage over Russia now that it's dependent on Russian drones and missiles for use against an EU candidate country, Ukraine. And there are serious national security concerns that this presents to the United States, its European allies, and also Israel with respect to Russian technology. The Russians can be assisting Iran with research and development on weaponization activities, delivery systems. It can also be assisting Iran with nuclear fuel fabrication and other nuclear materials. There was a report in 2022 which suggested that Iran was requesting assistance from Russia with nuclear fuel fabrication. So all of this needs to be taken into consideration, and it paints a very concerning picture.
Well, the U.S. official, Bill Burns, said it was a two-way street, didn't he, recently between Moscow and Tehran. And both countries have been warned that they will face additional sanctions. Other than that, what can Western powers do to stop this relationship from going nuclear?
Sanctions alone are only one part of the puzzle here. There has to be economic pressure, which are sanctions, diplomatic isolation, which I have seen the United States and its European allies not pursue at all with respect to the Iranian arms to Russia, and also with respect to Iran's assistance to Hamas, which carried out the October 7th massacre. And last and certainly not least, there has to be a credible military threat presented to Iran's increasingly alarming arming, funding, and training across the world, really, as well as its attacks on U.S. and European interests, as well as Israeli interests. Right now, we are only pursuing the economic pressure track. There has been no work done on the diplomatic isolation, and I have seen nothing publicly about the development of a credible military threat to Iran, specifically striking IRGC targets on Iranian soil with its drone and missile program. And that is the only way that we can really change the Iranian calculus, by making the costs outweigh the benefits.
Jason, are we in the midst of a very dangerous period right now, because the United States has its focus very much on the elections in November? Is this a good opportunity for Russia and Iran to really develop their relationship further?
Well, I think we have to look at this in terms of these are long-term agreements that have been negotiated over years, really, and now some of them are only coming to maturation. So this is really a continuum since 2022 of an increasing partnership between Russia and Iran. I think that, yes, it's possible that the upcoming U.S. election and the perception of President Biden as a lame duck will increase the risk tolerance and risk readiness of Russia and Iran to undertake these agreements and to advance their respective programs. But definitely this is something the U.S. intelligence community and its allies should be paying very close attention to.
Jason, thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there.
Thank you.
And adding to fears about Iran's ballistic missile program, Tehran says it has successfully launched another satellite into space. If confirmed, it would be the second such launch this year. Our Lynn Plackmeyer has the story.
Iran launched a satellite into space on Saturday with a rocket built by the country's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, state-run media reported. The latest for a program the West fears helps Tehran advance its ballistic missile program. The launch comes as the United States and European countries accuse Iran of transferring ballistic missiles to Russia that would be likely used in its war with Ukraine within weeks. Iran has denied this, but that hasn't deterred any concerns the US has about this. In a meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, American President Joe Biden expressed his concern about Iran and North Korea providing lethal weapons to Russia amid its ongoing war with Ukraine, according to a White House readout. The deputy U.S. ambassador to the United Nations also commented on the weapon transfer.
Iran's transfer represents a dramatic escalation and a highly destabilizing development, one that is likely to increase the suffering of the Ukrainian people. In response to Iran's ongoing military support to Russia, including the recent delivery of ballistic missiles for use against Ukraine, the U.S. Department of the Treasury is designating 10 individuals and 6 entities based in Iran and Russia, and identifying 4 vessels as blocked property that are enabling Iran's delivery of weapons components and weapon systems, including the UAVs and missiles, to Russia.
Meanwhile, Iran's retaliation against Israel after the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh still looms. Iran's President Pezeshkian met Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani at the start of a 3-day visit that Tehran and Baghdad said would include the signing of a number of agreements and discussions of the Gaza war and the situation in the Middle East.
If all of us Muslims, regardless of our various beliefs, fraternize together, would Israel with its small population be capable of massacring Muslims on a daily basis?
And so, with the launching of Iran's second satellite into space, Iran is one step closer in becoming a military superpower.
Yaakov Lapin still with me in the studio. So you've got Israel fighting Iran's various proxies on multiple fronts. Meanwhile, Tehran is progressing rapidly on both its relationship with Russia and its nuclear program.
100%. And this is a global story. And I think that is really the bottom line here. The attempt by the U.S., unfortunately, to contain Iran has not only failed to contain Iran in the region, but also promoted anti-American forces in the world. So Iran is now a major supplier of firepower to the Russians. There's something like 8,000 attacks so far that the Russians have carried out using Iranian drones. We're going to be adding ballistic missiles to that pretty soon. So with Russia dependent on Iran for its firepower, the Russians will obviously need to pay that debt back, and not only with money. Nuclear know-how seems to be one thing going on. In Syria, the Iranians are probably using Russian facilities for their arms smuggling. So this is a global story, and a failure to contain Iran is having already global ramifications. Regarding the satellite launch, I think the thing to look out for here is what the Iranians used to put that satellite into space. The IRGC has a launcher, which is basically doubling up as a basis for a solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missile. That's what is really being developed here, and it's a very, very long-range missile. And they're doing this under the guise of putting satellites into space, which is also going to help them in the long term gather intelligence from space.
Yaakov, thank you very much. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, 4 years ago today, Israel signed the Abraham Accords. More on that next.
Sail for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayasad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Temperatur. Sehr schön.
Welcome back. There have been multiple attacks on northern Israel today from Hezbollah in Lebanon. This a day after a senior member of the Iranian-backed group warned that tens of thousands more Israelis would be displaced from their homes in the event of an all-out war. Let's head north now. Our correspondent Robert Swift is standing by for us. And Rob, among today's attacks, a suicide drone, a host of missile launches. Just talk us through the last 24 hours or so.
Yeah, there's actually been more attacks that have taken place today than I can list in the time we have. At least 10 attacks from what I can tell from my tally. Just looking at those that have taken place in the last couple of hours, let's say. There have been drone sirens going off in the far east of Israeli territory, with 8 communities around the area of Kibbutz Dan and Rajar sounding drone sirens, excuse me. But also a little bit later, just about an hour ago, we saw a missile being fired over Kiryat Shmona. This was without a siren going off, and it seemed to us that this looked like a very, very high altitude interception, possibly a drone over that territory. We've been seeing a lot of Israeli aircraft over our heads in the last couple of hours, especially now. Just in the last few minutes, we saw jets basically patrolling along the length of the Israeli border with Lebanon in the hills to the west of Kiryat Shmona. And we heard at least one large boom, which possibly sounded like an airstrike taking place inside Israeli territory, possibly in the area of Merkaba or Hula, 2 large Lebanese towns that are over in that direction. There's a fair bit of activity taking place. It does appear that the cross-border fire, again, is slightly higher than maybe we would have seen back in previous months. But I have to say, this has become the new normal. Not only are cross-border attacks a daily occurrence now, but the level of intensity that they're being sustained at is higher than it has been in previous months.
Yeah, multiple attacks then, Rob, intensifying, as you say. And all of this against the backdrop of signs that Israel could be preparing now for a decisive war with Hezbollah.
Yeah, that's right. Increasing signs that the IDF might be shifting its focus away from the southern front, from Gaza, and up here. Now, people that were looking out for an indication of that got a bit of a startle this morning when an IDF drone dropped leaflets telling Lebanese citizens to evacuate from an area just to the northeast of Kiryat Shmona, around the Rajar area on the border. Now, following this, the IDF didn't have any comment to make, but a couple of hours later they did clarify that this was leaflets that had been dropped by one of the local units, but without the green light from the senior commanders. This in itself is the kind of thing that you might expect to happen if IDF troops were to go in on the ground. So the fact that it was taking place did startle some people, but once again, the IDF saying that this was not something that they had greenlit.
Interesting. Rob, thank you very much. Robert Swift there, up in the north of Israel. Yaakov Lapin is still with me in the studio, and there is a great deal of pressure on the Israeli government to act decisively against Hezbollah. We're coming up to the 1-year mark now, tens of thousands of Israelis still unable to return to their homes, and as we just heard Rob say, the attacks are intensifying.
Right. I think we have to look at this through the prism that Hassan Nasrallah and the Iranians are forcing us to look at this through, which is the linkage between the events in the Gaza Strip and the north. This is the linkage that Nasrallah has created right at the beginning of this war, and he has stuck to it. And his position has been the same. As long as Israel is militarily active against Hamas in Gaza, he will continue to bombard northern Israel no matter what. Now, the test is now, Israel is currently decreasing the intensity of its operations in Gaza. Most of Hamas's terror army has been disbanded. The Rafah brigade has been disbanded according to official IDF assessments. Now they're moving into this low intensity stage where they're hitting targets based on intelligence, but we're not seeing the kind of massive maneuvering that we saw earlier, and yet these attacks are still going on. So it seems that every day that this continues, while the IDF downshifts in Gaza, will create two things. First of all, more and more Israeli military resources will be freed up from Gaza and moved to the north. And second of all, Israeli patience will start to run down. I think there's a stop clock. We don't know how long that stop clock is, but it doesn't seem to have that much left to it. If Hezbollah does not cease its fire in the coming weeks, maybe month or two, it seems that would lead to an inevitable major Israeli offensive in Lebanon.
And what kind of intelligence has Israel gained over Hezbollah and its military capacities in the event of an all-out war? What would that war look like? Does Israel have a better idea of that now?
Well, I think that, the Israeli intelligence focus has been on Lebanon for a long time at the expense of Gaza before this war. Now, of course, that has changed. But Israel seems to have a pretty solid intelligence grip on events in Lebanon. And we saw we can call it a demonstration of that on August 25th, when Israel launched a very remarkable preemptive strike on Hezbollah, which was attempting to hit targets in northern and central Israel in response to the assassination of its military chief, Fuad Shukr. I think that was on the 30th of July. So when the IDF saw that they were about to conduct that attack, there was a remarkable preemptive strike involving 100 fighter jets, taking out something like 7,000 barrels that had rockets loaded up in them. And this really goes to show that when there's a concerted intelligence and operational effort, Israel can seriously diminish Hezbollah's firepower. Now, can that be repeated? To what extent? We don't know. That's classified information. But what is clear is that the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli intelligence community has greatly stepped up their abilities against Hezbollah. And this was a message, I think, on the 25th of August, that if Hezbollah does insist on going to a full-scale war, the price they're going to pay is going to be very, very heavy.
All right, Yaakov, for now, thank you. Well, despite the soaring tensions across the region, Israel's partnerships with its allies are holding. 4 years ago today, Israel signed the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco and Sudan. And trade with the UAE and Bahrain continues to grow, albeit at a more moderate pace than during that first year. But the big prize, a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, remains out of reach. Saudi officials say there will be no normalization until there are concrete steps towards the creation of a Palestinian state. Well, joining us now, Joshua Krasner is a senior researcher at the Moshe Dayan Center. Thank you very much for being with us. So I think it's fair to say that trade has continued, hasn't it? But it has stalled almost a year after October 7th. Nevertheless, those partnerships are holding. Are you surprised at how resilient they have been in some respects?
No, I'm not surprised. I'm pleased. All five of the countries with which we have formal peace treaties, which is Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, all have expressed in different ways their displeasure with what's going on with the government, with what's going on with Israeli policy in Gaza, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. But none of them have suspended relations, and none of them are indicating that suspension of relations is close in any way. And I think part of that, and the reason I'm not surprised, is the reason all of these countries have gone into their peace treaties and maintained their peace treaties is because both sides, but their side as well, has major strategic interests that are being met by these relationships. And while they might be unhappy with the particular policies we're pursuing now, and maybe want to lower their profile, the strategic calculus is still not really changed for them.
What about Saudi Arabia, though? The big jewel in the crown of normalization. The official Saudi position is no normalization until there are concrete steps taken by Israel towards the creation of a Palestinian state, which for the moment is a non-starter for Israel.
Yeah. So first of all, the Saudis kind of said that even before this war let out. The Saudis had said when there was a lot of noise about this just before October 7th that there was possibility of there being an imminent normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but it was dependent on several things, some of which the Americans had to provide, and they sort of gave a vague comment that there needed to be some sort of an Israeli contribution on the Palestinian issue. Now, of course, as the crisis in Gaza, the crisis that began with the Hamas invasion, October 7th, but as the crisis in Gaza has unfolded, for lots of reasons, for international reasons, for regional reasons, and even for internal political reasons, Saudi Arabia is not pushing forward the normalization too much. Just one word on that. One of the things that we have to remember is that the relationships between Israel and Saudi Arabia today and on October 7th are the best they've ever been. In other words, the last stage of normalization, the formal diplomatic relationship, has not occurred, and I think will not occur for a while. But we are meeting the Saudis, talking to the Saudis, flying over Saudi Arabia, doing things with Saudi Arabia that we could not have imagined doing in the past. So there's been tremendous progress with Saudi Arabia over recent years, over the years since the Abraham Accords. I think that last step that others have already taken, it's going to take a while for them to take. Because as I said, the strategic calculus now is different. And the downside of formalizing relations with Israel is higher than the upside that they would get of the various things that they could get from normalizing those relationships.
All right, Joshua, stay with me. Let me bring in Yaakov Lapin. We know that these Saudi governments, they say one thing publicly, they have to satisfy the very real public anger about what is happening in Gaza. But there is also a measure of admiration for how Israel is standing up to and handling Iran and its aggressiveness in the region.
Absolutely. I think behind closed doors, there's a very clear realization by the leaderships in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain that Israel's enemies are their enemies, whether it's Sunni Islamists like Hamas and all the other Islamists that want to topple regimes that they call the enemy because they don't apply, a stringent Sharia law and don't wage jihad against the West, but rather cooperate against it. So there's clear enmity between the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is a core part of, and these countries. And of course, the Shiite imperial ambitions of Iran, which is intending to take over the entire region and topple anybody that stands in their way. Obviously, that's a major threat to these Sunni countries. And so I think that they're quietly banking on Israel to make significant progress against the Iranian axis. But there's a limit to what they can say in public. The fact that these relationships have remained intact after nearly a year of warfare in the Gaza Strip, I think is remarkable and a testament to the real glue, the strategic glue that holds them together.
Okay, and Joshua, do you think that any other countries might sign up over the next year? Some names that have been put forward, Pakistan or even Indonesia.
So I never say never, but no. I think that in the situation that has been created in the Middle East in the wake of the Hamas invasion, and I agree with what Yaakov just said, they do this differentiation between the fact that our enemies are the same, but I think they authentically, not only because of public opinion, I think they authentically think that we are pursuing a wrong policy in the Palestinian region. So there's kind of this duality in their policy. They really do want us to reach a ceasefire in Gaza and begin to go into a political process with the Palestinians, but they understand that they have helped us against Hamas and against the Houthis and see Hezbollah and even Hamas as their enemies as well. But I don't think that, I think the people who have come the farthest up till now, the Saudis, and I don't think they're going to do it very soon. And I think that anyone behind that is one step behind. I think, theoretically, there could be some small and unimportant countries. Pakistan is not one of those, neither is Indonesia. But I don't think that any Muslim country right now would see an upside to a normalizing relationship with Israel.
Okay.
I think there are those who are interested, and I think they're going to wait.
Okay, and of course, Israel has had a peace treaty with Jordan since 1994 now. That is proving to be a very complicated relationship. I know you've spent some time in Jordan, Joshua. Just your outlook going forward with that relationship.
So I think that, as you said, it's a relationship that's been going on for 30 years, and it's a relationship that is extremely robust and resilient with all the problems that it faces, extremely robust and resilient. And I think the reason for that is even more than the countries that are farther away, like Morocco, like UAE and Bahrain. We have significant strategic interests with Jordan. They have significant strategic interests with us, right? There's security interests, which have been there all along. They are very dependent on us for gas today. They're very dependent on us for water today. 70% of the electricity in Jordan is generated by Israeli gas. Now, the public doesn't necessarily It's not secret, but the public doesn't necessarily know or internalize that. But they are extremely dependent on us economically, and in the past 10 years, we have added this kind of an infrastructure economic dependence, which didn't exist before, which I think is extremely stabilizing. They don't like our policy on in Gaza, or they don't like what's going on now in Gaza. They don't like our policy in the West Bank. They don't like our policy on the Temple Mount. They are very unhappy with our Temple Mount. They don't particularly like our prime minister. But I think that could lead to cool relations. But I think I would be extremely surprised if Jordan not even broke relations, but even suspended or downgraded relations. I just don't think it's in the cards.
Joshua Kreisner at the Moshe Dayan Center. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
While staying with Jordan, the King has named a palace aide as the new Prime Minister. This after the government resigned in the wake of last week's elections. Jordan's Islamists came out on top in that vote, capitalising on anger over the war in Gaza to post their best showing in decades. More in this report.
Jordan's Prime Minister, Bashir Kassaoune, has submitted his resignation less than a week after local parliamentary elections saw Islamist opposition groups make significant gains, though the results fall short of an Islamist takeover of the government. With the pro-government factions maintaining a majority in the 138-member parliament, it has raised fears that an empowered Islamist faction could challenge government policies on free market reforms and broader foreign policy objectives.
Today, what's happening in Gaza is an unprecedented battle, and neither the Jordanian nor Islamic movement can be bystanders. We believe this is an existential battle, not just a normal conflict. The voice of the Jordanian street has been influential in shaping political directions regarding this war.
It comes after a Jordanian truck driver opened fire at the King Hussein Allenby crossing, killing 3 Israelis and causing the border to be shut for 2 days. Thousands of Jordanians were seen celebrating in the streets of Amman following the shooting.
This protest is in support of the heroic act that was done by Maher al-Jazi, and this shows the conscience of the Jordanian people, of their hatred to this Zionist enemy. If they give the chance for the Jordanian people to fight, the Jordanians will do the same of what Maher al-Jazi did and even more, because these criminal enemies are killing children and women every morning and evening.
The U.S. has long assisted Jordan in combating extremist groups in and around its borders, but that deterrence has been focused northward to counter the threats from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS operating from Iraq and Syria. However, that threat has become increasingly domestic. As Israel's campaign to root out Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank continues, fears have risen in Jordan of a spillover of the conflict, with bad actors looking to exploit the situation for their own gains. The head of King Abdullah's office, Jafar Hassan, is expected to replace Kassaoune according to reports. For Jordan, relations with Israel pose a challenging balancing act, with the kingdom keen to maintain diplomatic and security ties with Israel, while keeping public anger focused away from the king and his government to avoid widespread discontent.
Yaakov Lapin's with me in the studio. So Yaakov, we had 3 Israelis murdered by a Jordanian Islamist at the Allenby crossing just last week. We've now seen the Islamists doing very well in the elections there. I mean, how concerned should Israel be about the stability of Jordan?
I think Israel's always concerned about the stability of Jordan, especially the Israeli defense establishment, which maintains close ties, mostly behind closed doors, with their Jordanian counterparts. Jordan has always been a paradox. On the one hand, it is Israel's strategic depth. It is the flapjacket that keeps the Shiite Iranian axis at bay. The Iranians have been trying, and with some limited success, infiltrating Jordan with arms smuggling runs, activating Muslim Brotherhood connections, activating smuggling routes, trying to get arms into the West Bank through Jordan, and they're also trying to do that from Syria and from Iraq. Now, on the other hand, there's wild incitement against Israel. The Jordanian population is largely hostile, deeply hostile against the state of Israel and Israeli people. It doesn't help this situation that around 60% of Jordanians are of Palestinian descent, so they have a direct stake in this conflict. And so when you throw it all together, really the Jordanian monarchy is playing, as was just said in this report, a very delicate balancing act maintaining its strategic cooperation with Israel while trying not to come across as quote-unquote collaborators in front of their own population. It's a very difficult act. They have been doing it for many years. This war has definitely, turned the heat up on this balancing act.
Yaakov, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yaakov Lapin, he's the host of the Lapin Assessment. You can find that on Patreon. He's also at the Miriam Institute and the Jewish News Syndicate as well. Always a pleasure. Thank you, Yaakov.
Thank you.
Well, Syria's President Assad has tried to break the political deadlock there, issuing a decree naming the former communications minister, Mohammad Ghazi Jalali, as the new prime minister. Syria has had a caretaker government since elections in July, but Jalali has been under European Union sanctions for almost a decade now over his role in the Assad regime's crackdown on the Syrian people. Nearly 500,000 people have been killed there since 2011. Well, with us now, Colonel Rich Oughton is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's also a geopolitical consultant for Dragoman LLC. Good to see you as always, Rich. Thank you very much for being with us. This appointment in Syria, does this make any difference to the situation there? We know the country is under the control of a myriad of groups and, of course, international powers, including Iran.
Yes, well, of course, switching the deck chairs on the Titanic is sometimes how this sort of action is referred to. There's a very small inner circle in this very dysfunctional state around Assad, and they're not all Syrians. Of course, there's Iranian advisors, and there's Lebanese Hezbollah with whom Bashar al-Assad has long had close relations and close ties that are really his brain trust. So to an extent, whoever's going to be appointed the prime minister, it's not exactly a cosmetic post, but it's certainly more a ceremonial than an operationally important post. Syria remains isolated internationally. I think the wave of quasi-normalizations that they hoped would bring Syria back into the diplomatic mainstream hasn't really happened. And as you noted, really the government in Damascus only controls something a little bit over half the country geographically, and even in that half defers to its foreign patrons. So I don't think that Jalali's selection is that big a deal when you're talking about a regime that's largely viewed as genocidal by the West and much of the international community. The fact that an EU-sanctioned figure is now the titular head of it is not that big a development.
And of course, this comes just a few days on the issue of Syrian sovereignty after reports, unconfirmed reports, that Israeli special forces managed to raid and destroy an Iranian weapons factory inside Syria. I mean, do you see Syria becoming more of a front in the war between Israel and its proxies? And where does the United States stand on that?
Well, it's an interesting question because Assad has, I think, done a fairly good job of limiting the number of direct strikes on Israel from Syrian territory. But that largely was done to protect its status as a resupply base for Lebanese Hezbollah. Lebanese Hezbollah, of course, is in daily combat with Israeli forces and in causing tremendous difficulties for the people of northern Israel. This is an example of the fact that if the Iranians and through them the Syrians are thinking that in the event of a major war in Lebanon, that they can do rapid resupply of missiles and rockets from this factory because it's in the middle of a mountain, Israel sent the signal, no, it's not that easy. We can actually put ground troops in if we need to, commandos, as was reported in multiple different sources in open press. That means that you don't have stable supply. I think this was a deterrent action against further escalation by Lebanese Hezbollah, or it could also be preparatory to an expanded Israeli strike. As for what the Americans think, I think most Americans, while there is certainly criticism of Israel for the war in Gaza and the perceived lack of a real exit strategy for or political end game to that conflict, I think Americans on both sides of the aisle are firmly behind Israel when it comes to the war against the defense of themselves, really, in northern Israel against Lebanese Hezbollah. And for that reason, Central Command Commander Kurilla was in Israel as a sign and a show of solidarity and was briefed on the operation, it is reported, prior to its execution.
Now, I want to ask you, there are hundreds of US troops who are still stationed in Syria and who have come under attack. I'm just wondering, what did you make of those comments by the US Vice President and potential Commander-in-Chief, Kamala Harris, when she said there are no US personnel in active conflict zones right now?
Well, I think Syria is pretty obviously an active conflict zone on multiple fronts. So I'm not exactly sure. I think she had in mind probably the fact that the Biden-Harris team pulled us out of Afghanistan and that the troops that we have in both Syria and Iraq at least nominally, are there to do train and equip missions to help local forces in the fight against ISIS. This is kind of a fig leaf. I mean, to say that they're not in a conflict zone, they're not engaged in a formally declared war, nor in active combat operations against an enemy force. In Syria, they're helping a local proxy force against ISIS, and in Iraq, they're helping primarily the Kurdish forces in the north, but also the Iraqi army against the remnants of ISIS there. So I think in a strictly legalistic term, that they're not engaged in war might be a true statement, but the fact that they're not in a conflict zone is clearly a misread of where they are and what they're doing.
Colonel Richardson, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Always good to be with you.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of Middle East Now. Do stay with us on I24 News. Benita Levin is up next with the rundown. Good night.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Benjamin Netanyahu vows Israel will inflict a heavy price on the Houthis in Yemen after one of its hypersonic ballistic missiles was intercepted over central Israel on Sunday morning. No one was hurt. We bring you live updates from the ground. Normalization. Today is the 4-year anniversary of the signing of the historic Abraham Accords between Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Israel saying today it's committed to expanding the circle of peace with other countries in the region. How viable is that at the moment? We speak to an expert. And is Moscow helping Tehran develop its nuclear weapons program? The US and UK voiced concerns that secrets may have been shared between the two countries following the recent delivery of ballistic missiles from Iran to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine. We're live in Washington with the latest reaction. This is the rundown on I24 News. I'm Benita Levine. An unexpected wake-up call in large parts of central Israel on this day. Red alert sirens sounding early on Sunday morning after a ballistic missile was launched by the Houthis in Yemen towards the center of Israel. The missile was partially intercepted mid-air, sending burning shrapnel down to the ground. No one was hurt. There was some damage in several areas. The Houthis claim the hypersonic missile attack was part of what they call their continuous retaliation to Israel's strike on the port of Hodeidah and its ongoing war in Gaza. Israel struck that major port in July following a deadly Houthi drone attack on Tel Aviv. So what will the response from Israel be like this time around? Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran has more in this report.
The Houthis keeping their promises. Iran's Yemeni proxy launched a long-range ballistic missile at central Israel on Sunday morning. Sirens sounded in numerous cities, the IDF said. The missile landed in an open area after multiple interceptors managed to hit the missile, causing it to fall apart mid-air, only partially intercepting it.
The Yemeni armed forces carried out a special military operation, targeting a military target in the area of Jaffa inside Israel. This operation was executed with a new hypersonic ballistic missile, which successfully reached its target. The enemy's defenses failed to intercept and counter it.
Fallen shrapnel caused damage in multiple areas, including a train station near Modi'in. There were no injuries as a result of the strike or the interception attempts, but 9 people were injured running to shelters.
The missile traveled a distance of 1,260 miles in 11.5 minutes and caused a state of fear and panic among the Zionists, as more than 2 million of them headed to shelters for the first time in the history of the Israeli enemy.
According to the Iranian-backed militia, the attack came in response to a July 20th Israeli airstrike on the port of Hodeidah. 14 people were killed in the strike, and the Houthis vowed to retaliate in a continuous manner.
The enemies will be surprised on land, as they were surprised at sea, with new and unprecedented technologies. We will spare no effort in supporting the Palestinian people.
This was the third Houthi strike that managed to bypass Israel's multi-layered air defenses. Back in March, a cruise missile landed in an open area near the southern city of Eilat, causing no damage or injuries. And 2 months ago, a drone launched from Yemen exploded on an apartment in Tel Aviv, killing 1 man and wounding 4 others.
We are in a multi-front battle against Iran's axis of evil that strives to destroy us. This morning, the Houthis launched a surface-to-surface missile from Yemen into our territory. They should have known by now that we exact a heavy price for any attempt to harm us. Those who need a reminder in this matter are invited to visit the port of Hodeidah. Anyone who attacks us will not escape from our arms.
After Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel, which were mostly intercepted, Israel boasted at its cutting-edge air defenses. Now, the Houthis have shown that even a single missile can bypass them, raising unease as to the efficacy of Israel's defenses.
So for the latest on the ground, let's go live to our correspondent, Zach Anders. He joins us from the city of Modi'in in central Israel. And Zach, the Houthis are happy with this hypersonic cruise missile. It traveled more than 2,000 kilometers before reaching central Israel and was intercepted. Luckily, no one was hurt. What new details are known, and what are you seeing there in Modi'in?
You know, the interesting thing is that folks don't really seem to be caught in some sort of, spectacular place tonight. They're not really talking about it. Things going on as normal. We were next to a cafe, chatted up some folks, and nobody seems that moved by what happened this morning. Very early for them, waking a lot of people up. Those 9 injuries you heard caused by people running to their shelters, running to shelter. What we have major questions about, and I'll be honest, I'm getting nowhere tonight with my sources trying to understand more about what happened here. This is a major event, and then the big questions that persist here. We're told that this was launched from Yemen and that it was picked up at 6:21 a.m. local time here, and that for the duration of its flight was tracked. These obviously are massive missiles that would show themselves to some of this very advanced systems that Israel has throughout the region to be able to detect these kind of launches and intercept them. So the alarm's not being triggered here until 6:30. That's 8-9 minutes into its flight, this missile's flight, and it is nearing the end of its trajectory at that point, end of its flight in this direction. So we're getting some questions from folks wondering why the alarm was triggered so late. If you know what the trajectory is, you know where it's going, and it's coming this way. The bits of it breaking apart as it did, we see some images, what appears to be high altitude, some sort of high altitude interception taking place. You'll note that the IDF is not calling it that. The latest update the IDF says is that it disintegrated this missile. So often when we've seen these official IDF statements, they've been very quick to say they successfully intercepted a target. That's not what we're seeing officially commented here within the latest IDF releases. So some major questions about the timeline, some major questions about the weapon itself, and whether or not how this was really shot down. Of course, it rained debris over a wide area here in Modi'in. The train station suffered some light damage, but we have a trail of debris that rained down on a 5-mile radius, starting fires in multiple locations. One of those fires we were at earlier, I've been trying to ask and see, is there any bit of the wreckage, any part of the missile you're willing to show me? And right now, I'm getting nowhere with that. This is being treated with the highest levels of authority, keeping this under wraps at this point. And taking this very seriously, I should add, because this not only is a major distance to fly and it being tracked, but it's a major amount of airtime over Israeli airspace before this gets intercepted, just steps away from Tel Aviv. So some huge questions here, Benita, tonight and going forward.
Huge questions indeed. Luckily, we have experts here to try and answer those in our studio for now. Thank you so much, correspondent Zach Anders, live from the city of Modi'in in central Israel. Thank you, Zach. And now, for more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers and the former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories in the IDF, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I'm coming straight to you, Eitan, because Zach, our colleague, raised a range of questions about this wake-up call for so many Israelis in central Israel, hearing these sirens, racing for cover. Luckily, no one was hurt, but help us understand exactly what happened.
First of all, it's coming like a revenge for the Israeli big strike on the Houthi port that till now is not working. It's stopped working, and for them it's a big, let's say, damage to their economy and all their transportation, what happened in Hodeidah. But in their reaction, they already had tried few times by launching rockets and also UAVs that were stopped on the way. I think that the United States is fulfilling here a very important task during the way of this range of rockets and UAVs that the Houthis has promised to react and to make a revenge towards Israel. At that case already, yesterday, Israel got a warning from one of the Houthis, the leadership of the main leadership, I think is the deputy that warns Israel about this kind of attack. It succeeded to enter. There are a few questions that your correspondent is right concerning by checking, but one thing is clear. It's a surface-to-surface missile. Secondly, it has been working on it, some upgrading of things that will allow this kind of rocket to bring it to Israel in such a far distance, more than 2,000 kilometers. The thing is that the weight of the TNT on the warhead of this rocket has been a little bit smaller. But on the way, there are questions why the interceptors will not succeed to damage this rocket before it comes very close to Israel. And one of the things that the Houthis are proud that 2 million people of Israel were under alert is because of the fact that the interceptors that were launched towards this rocket has the damage towards some areas about the pieces that has been fallen, and then more and more you can close the area of the damage. You cannot take risk. They succeed to make it. My news is that it will not be the end of this kind of war with the Houthis. I'm much more worried, for example, dozens of rockets that are launching from Hezbollah every day towards the north, the damaging of it. We have to be aware that this case is a study case to us from the east. It shows you the problem that we have with Shiite militias from Iraq, Houthis, that Iran is behind it. But in the front, it shows you what is the meaning of a war, for example, with Hezbollah, that such surface-to-surface missiles that can be launched can bring damage in such a war. But at the end, I trust our air defense systems. I think is the best in the world that bring security to most of the population.
Last time when an attack drone from the Houthis was launched towards Tel Aviv, and it was a fatal launch. The response was the strike we saw on Hodeidah port. It was an enormously damaging strike from Israel. What is it likely to look like this time round? What is the likely response? We heard the sentiments from Benjamin Netanyahu. What could he possibly be contemplating as we speak?
Well, that was a deadly strike, and Israel tends to respond more forcefully when those are the results of the strike. This attack, it didn't hit its target and it didn't kill anyone. And so you could say that Israel's air defense systems are kind of double-edged swords. On the one hand, they protect the Israeli population. On the other hand, by not causing damage in the strikes, it allows Israel, or puts it in a place where it doesn't necessarily have to respond forcefully because not a lot of damage was caused. And so I don't think we're going to see another Hodeidah-like response to this. This strike was coming. We were waiting for it. They kept on reiterating their vows that they were going to strike Israel. I will just note regarding this interceptor, it was hit by an Arrow interceptor, but that didn't knock it out of the sky. That just broke it into pieces, and then all the shrapnel is what caused all the sirens in multiple communities because over their territory it dispersed. And I think an important question that Zach raised is if Israel knew about this rocket or this missile in advance or as it was launched, why did it wait till it sounded the siren when it was in Israeli territory? My understanding is that it intended to intercept it outside Israeli territory. Once that failed, that forced the sirens to be sounded in various communities, not just specifically regarding this interception.
As you say, many questions remain unanswered. No doubt there will be investigations, there will be answers. But Ariel, I want to bring you in on other reports that Houthis are being transferred to Syria, seemingly a relatively quiet front. What do we know and what is being made of that potential development?
Right, so we know that Syria is a base for multiple pro-Iranian Shiite militias, but I think we need to point our focus on the Houthis specifically amassing on that side of the border. To my understanding, it is at least a few hundred, potentially a few thousand Houthis that have made their way via Jordan, via Iraq, in groups of a few dozen at a time to Syria. This is based on multiple reports, also the latest by Russian Sputnik that has a close connection to what happens in Syria. Also, the Alma Research Center issued a research paper on this exactly. Now, what we're seeing now on screen, and this is why we're making a point to highlight this, is because the Houthis are training, and they're showing that they're training for the scenario of storming Israeli communities and massacring the inhabitants, the civilians, similar to the October 7th course of action. And the fact that the Houthis are practicing this, they're thousands of kilometers away. But if they're on Israel's northern border with the Golan, which is considered a much weaker border than with Lebanon, this makes it a real threat. Now, the Houthis aren't conducting these military drills for nothing. We saw Hamas carrying out similar drills, similar practices in the months leading up to October 7th. Now, this isn't to be necessarily alarmist at the highest level, but we need to take into consideration that they're preparing, they're planning for this course of operation, storming the border, and they're amassing along Israel's border. So this is something that the IDF is aware of, and I hope they're taking into the proper consideration.
We're going to take a deeper look at the activity, so to speak, of the various Iranian proxies on various locations. But gentlemen, stay with us for now as we turn to the north. Eitan mentioned it a little bit earlier. The latest on concerns over what many experts call an inevitable all-out confrontation with Hezbollah. There are conflicting views around the timing of a possible military operation in Lebanon, as rocket fire continues from southern Lebanon, and there is still no diplomatic breakthrough to end the near-daily cross-border clashes with the terror group there. Hezbollah has been showing its solidarity with Gaza throughout the war, a war started by Hamas on the 7th of October. So for the latest on the ground, we now go live to our correspondent, Robert Swift. He joins us from northern Israel. And Rob, we know sirens were sounding yet again in northern communities earlier, warning of a drone infiltration in the Upper Galilee communities of Daphna, Kibbutz Dan and Amir, amongst others. Also reports out of southern Lebanon of Israeli strikes earlier. Bring us up to speed. What is happening across that front?
That's right. It's been an intense day of fire. I was momentarily just about to tell you that the last hour has been relatively quiet, but then some explosions and flares over the border not far from our location. The day really started early with a large barrage against Kiryat Shmona and drone infiltrations going off this morning at 8 o'clock. And it has not really stopped. There's been attacks throughout the day, right along the length of the border, it has to be said. Most of these have been rocket attacks, but there have been several drone infiltrations. One taking place just a couple of hours ago over Kiryat Shmona with what looked to us like a high-altitude interception by Israel's Iron Dome system over the city. Speaking with residents in Kiryat Shmona, they've told us that they're feeling quite pessimistic with regards to the situation, that they do feel that some form of escalation does feel like it could take place. One resident told me that this feels a lot like the atmosphere prior to the 2006 conflict between Hezbollah and Israel. And the string of different attacks right along the length of the border across much of this afternoon and this evening is only going to add to those concerns.
Concerning indeed. Thank you so much for now. We will be coming back to our correspondent Robert Swift in northern Israel in the coming hours. Thank you, Rob. And now, thousands of protesters taking a stand in Tel Aviv overnight, calling once again for the Israeli government to do more to secure a ceasefire hostage deal that would see 101 hostages freed from Hamas captivity in Gaza. Those calls all the more pressing following the execution of 6 Israeli hostages by Hamas in a tunnel in Gaza earlier this month, and the recent publication of footage from those tunnels some 20 meters
underground. It's 345 days since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction. It's still not clear how many hostages are alive. More in this report by our Jodina Tilowitz.
9 months after the bodies of Ron Sherman, Nick Bizer, and Elia Toledano were recovered from Gaza, an IDF investigation has confirmed that the 3 former hostages were killed as a result of a, quote, byproduct of an Israeli airstrike. A fact that is sure to add more fuel to the fire in the anger felt by Israelis calling for a ceasefire.
This evening, like every Saturday, we hope that hundreds of thousands will come. Will show sympathizing with the families of the kidnapped.
Once again, thousands of Israelis gathered to attend a weekly protest, calling on the government to secure a deal for the release of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Mass protests have been renewed in the past 2 weeks following the recovery of the bodies of 6 hostages and the release of footage of the tunnel where they were held and later killed. Visuals which have sparked outrage among the families of the hostages who have expressed frustration in the government's negotiations to bring them home.
We were horrified this week when we learned the abysmal, inhuman conditions our hostages who are held in the Hamas tunnels are enduring. What they are going through in captivity is unimaginable. They are dying, locked up in small, unventilated cells, in tunnels deep underground, with no air, malnourished, without seeing the light of day for 11 months.
At the protest, the mother of Matan Angrest, an abducted soldier, played audio of her son addressing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from his captivity in Gaza, his first sign of life since being taken hostage on October 7th.
Netanyahu, אתה חייב לעשות את ההחלפה הזאת בין האסירים בישראל לאסירים פה. אני מאוד רוצה לראות את המשפחה ואת החברים שלי, זה מאוד חשוב. אני חושב שאתה מסוגל לזה, צריך לרצות, אבל אני סומך עליך, אתה יכול לעשות את זה, ומקווה שכמה שיותר בקרוב.
A ceasefire in Gaza that would have included a deal for the release of hostages has not materialized, with Israel and Hamas taking turns blaming each other for the impasse.
Still in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Eitan, how much more can the nation handle? How much more can the families of the hostages still in Gaza handle when we hear the pain, the trauma, waiting for answers? Your take on what realistically should happen next?
I think that we cannot anymore talk about how more they can, because they cross already, in my opinion, the line. The time is time of hours, the time is lack of oxygen, and what you just described. There is, we call it a state decision, and a state decision should be taken by the Prime Minister. The big question now, after what you see, what's going in the north, with the escalation, and the declarations of the Prime Minister of Israel, and he's right. We have to bring back our civilians there back home. Even there it's late. It means, what are you going to do with Gaza? If you are going to the north without closing the issue with the hostages in Gaza, it means that the chance of returning alive is low to zero. The second issue is what you will do with the fight with the Gazans. So it still brings, and it gives the last option, in my opinion, in order to get back these people who should be at home. This is our duty, and we should deal with Gaza. Later on, it will be a deal, a deal for years. And what we have to do before changing the forces is to see how we are making all our efforts, but all in order to make or to bring it to opportunity of agreement, and above it should be the United States with Qatar and Egypt in order to force Hamas. We are not coming in a weak place for the military achievements. We are coming with a weak place because of our fault at the 7th of October. We should bring our civilians and soldiers back home and to continue the fight. If not, the chances are low to zero, and it will be this end of the story will be a pain to the Israeli story for generations.
How would the equation, so to speak, change if Israeli troops were to catch up, so to speak, with Yahya Sinwar?
I don't think that we should speak with him, of course, directly.
There's no one else.
The work should be done by Egypt and Qatar and under the pressure of the United States. Listen, with all the situation now, that Sinwar quite feel self-confidence, maybe, with the fact that around the sea, the north is burning, West Bank is bubbling, Houthis are shooting, and all these militias in Iraq, it feels like, and also the threats by Erdogan to create a Muslim campaign towards Israel, he feel the wind. But at the end, the situation of Sinwar, of his people, are in a very bad situation, and believe me, he is kind of a leader who wants to live. And I think with this kind of pressure, at least we should bring and convince ourselves that we did the best. We can do it. It's give some things that you should not give in a regular time, but at the end, after it, bring them home and then make with him the final calculation, because it's going to be for a long time, but we should not bring Hamas back. We made mistakes. We had some chances till now, at least 3 times, but we should not miss this opportunity.
The hostages need to come home, no doubt about that. Eitan Dangot, Ariel Osurain, stay with us. There's much more to discuss right now, though. A very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. We ask the question, is Moscow helping Tehran develop its nuclear weapons program? We go to the US for the latest reaction. Stay tuned. This is The Rundown.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at IsraelBonds.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown, and we start again with breaking news. An incident in Jerusalem's Old City just a short while ago. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran, what details are known?
So about half an hour ago, Palestinian in the Damascus Gate, the main entrance of Palestinians to the Old City, stabs a border police officer in his 20s with a sharp object and then runs off. Police officers in the area shoot the suspect and neutralize him. That's according to the police statement. Not clear what his condition is. We know that the 20-year-old border police officer is in mild condition and he's treated and taken to hospital. Now, this would make East Jerusalem the last front to join the other fronts of this security, very challenging security situation that Israel finds itself in. Obviously, as in the West Bank, Israeli forces operating intensely to try and prevent these attacks from happening. We haven't heard in recent period of many attacks in Jerusalem. This is an indication, because usually after attacks like this, we often see copycat attacks try and imitate what they saw today. The results of this, Israeli border police officer in mild condition. The stabber, he was neutralized by police. Again, not quite sure what that means, but it usually means that he was killed.
A developing situation. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osaran keeping tabs on the latest developments as they happen. Stay with us. Much more to discuss as we turn the spotlight right now to the military cooperation between Iran and Russia and the possible sharing of nuclear secrets. Well, the US and UK are concerned that Moscow has been helping Tehran develop its nuclear weapons program in exchange for the recent delivery of ballistic missiles to Russia for the use in the war in Ukraine. Now, President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Keir Starmer discussing their concerns in Washington in recent days as Iran continues the process of enriching enough uranium to build a nuclear bomb. Secretary of State Antony Blinken voicing concerns that cooperation between Moscow and Tehran threatens wider European security. The US, Germany, Britain and France imposing new sanctions on Iran in recent days, including measures against its national airline. Meanwhile, confirmation today that Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian will attend the upcoming BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia late next month. So for more insight, we now welcome Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He joins us from Washington. Good to see you, Behnam. Thank you for your time. It's disturbing to think that Russia may be helping Iran develop its nuclear weapons program in exchange for this alleged delivery of ballistic missiles Tehran gave Moscow for its war against Ukraine. What is your take on these nuclear concerns voiced by the US and the UK? What can you share?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and this is certainly an area to watch because as Iran and Russia tighten their military and political and security and intelligence ties, it was more a matter of when, not if, the crown jewel, the nuclear issue, would enter the frame here. But lest we forget, Russia has already been helping the Islamic Republic with its nuclear program. Diplomatically, the Russians were the main interlocutors with the P5+1 ever since 2021, when the Biden administration has been trying to resurrect the 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA. Even under the auspices of that agreement, the Russians were involved in the underground Fordo facility to allegedly make it, a more civilian-friendly facility. We know that didn't pan out too well. The Russians pulled out somewhere between 2019 and 2021 there. The Russians are already involved in producing or trying to build new light water reactors in the southwest of Iran, and they provide the spent fuel, and they provide the fuel and they take away the spent fuel for Iran's reactor at Bushehr. So all of that is a basis, I think, for what Secretary Blinken has been saying about what the future could hold. And my fear is that it's not going to be limited just to this kind of technology. My fear is it could be on two fronts. One is on the illicit procurement front, so that the regime can get dual use or WMD relevant technology for its nuclear program. And the second, God forbid, could be on the weaponization front, where Russian nuclear secrets could help Tehran connect the last series of dots as it tries to go for a nuclear weapon as cost-free and as covertly as possible. And this could be anything like research and development, warhead design and miniaturization, you name it. But the problem is, because we don't know right now, this is a gray cloud that is hanging over America's ability to thwart Russia and Iran's deepening military ties.
A distressing grey cloud indeed. Given exactly what you're outlining, what can the West do here? Sanctions don't seem to be making that much of an impact. Iran is obviously denying sending any weapons to Russia for use against Ukraine, and it's vowing to respond to the latest round of sanctions from the West, which it's calling a failed tool. So what next?
Well, there needs to be a heck of a lot next, and soon. Russia is poised to be Iran's lawyer on the UN Security Council from here on out, unless the West, particularly Washington and its transatlantic partners, works to snap back and restore the international legal baseline for pressure against the Islamic Republic. Once you have that baseline restored, you can create a wider net for political and economic pressure against the Islamic Republic, to have a wider net to catch the places that its agents go shopping to get the capabilities and the technologies and the components it needs for its nuclear program. Beyond that, of course, you need to have a change in philosophy in Washington to actually embrace a pressure policy, one that escalates sanctions pressure as the threat escalates. That means cracking down on oil shipments and petrochemicals. And then in all of the jurisdictions that Tehran is sending drones and missiles and all these other projectiles to, Washington needs to make sure that those forces on the ground that are the recipients or on the ends of these weapons, whether the Ukrainians or the Israelis, have all they need to defend themselves. That means more in terms of air and missile defense, as well as what they can to offset and counter these systems. And that does mean longer range strike capabilities, particularly for the Ukrainians.
And talking about the developments here in the Middle East, Iran has yet to conduct its vowed direct strike on Israel following that assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in recent months. A humiliating elimination in the Iranian capital, of course, blamed on Israel. Iranian proxies are active, the Houthis, as recently as this morning. What do you make of the strategy Iran is employing, waiting and waiting while its proxies do the work, so to speak?
Indeed, its proxies are doing the work. I have a slightly different take than this than some friends and colleagues here in Washington, which is that while as devastating and as humiliating as the killing of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran was, the non-response is more born out of a sense of success in Tehran than a sense of fear. As we get closer and closer to the one-year anniversary of the 10/7 terrorist attacks, the regime is seeing things in the region go its way. Saudi-Israeli normalization is delayed. There is now a massive chasm between the Arab street and the Arab state. America is having a harder time connecting the dots in the Middle East. Iran is benefiting from great power coverage, be it economically from the Chinese and politically and militarily, and as we discussed earlier, potentially nuclearly from the Russians. So things are going its way, and it would not necessarily behoove the Islamic Republic to try to save face and then lose its head. So I fear that the non-response is driven more by a sense of strategy than by a sense of successful deterrence. That doesn't discount the role of American deterrence, which has been significant in the month of August, or the role of Israeli deterrence in the same time. But Iran is merely threatening a wider war to be able to prey on America's fears of restraint. And that fear of restraint, as you sense in Israel, is coming down on Israel like a ton of bricks to force a ceasefire and to foist a ceasefire on them between the war aims are actually met.
Always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much, Behnam Ben Taleblu, live from Washington. Thank you. And as Behnam just mentioned, today marks exactly 4 years since the signing of the historic Abraham Accords between Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, groundbreaking normalization deals. Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz saying today on the anniversary that the country is committed to expanding the circle of peace with other countries in the region, adding that those agreements expressed a shared destiny that changed the Middle East for the better politically, in security, economically, socially, and on the education front. So for more insight, we now welcome Eric Mandel, founder and director at the Middle East Political Information Network and senior editor for security at the Jerusalem Report. He joins us live from New York. Thank you so much for your time. Difficult to believe it's 4 years since that historic signing ceremony on the White House lawns. Of course, Donald Trump spearheading those deals. A different time, a different Middle East right now, in the middle of a war. Then it was dubbed a new era for the region. So take us back to that time. Your thoughts exactly 4 years ago, moving towards today.
So what really should have happened as a consequence of that, there should have been a Nobel Peace Prize. But unfortunately, the animus in the world towards Israel and to President Trump did not allow that to happen. What it created, and it is not over, even though it's now tremendously challenged, was a common or a new common vision for the Middle East with unprecedented regional collaborations between Israel and the new Arab states, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco was upgraded with ties. Even Kosovo was part of what was joined on there. And the great hope was that Saudi Arabia would be next. But there's been some major problems over the last 4 years. But again, I think we need to look at this not just over 4 years, which is through Western eyes. Let's look at this through Middle East eyes. This is just the beginning. And most of these countries want the United States to be engaged, and most of these countries want the United States to be engaged not only economically, but because they fear Iran. So the Abraham Accords was a crisis for Iran, and much of what we've seen in the last 4 years has been because of Iran's response to this new collaboration, which was everything from people-to-people engagements, to multilateral forums in Israel with Arab leaders, a total revolution, not an evolution, a revolution. And it is a little bit on hold now, but there really is the possibilities if shepherded well by the next American administration.
Well, we wait to see exactly what that next administration, of course, looks like. Interesting comments from the UAE over the weekend saying it will not play any role in the day after the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip unless a Palestinian state is established. That's according to Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed. He was speaking on Saturday. What do you make of comments like that from the UAE at this juncture? There's been so much criticism of the lack of plan for the day after from Israel at this juncture.
Well, I don't know if I would hold anyone's word right now to being part of a day after plan. I do believe that under the right circumstances, the UAE, even the Saudis, the Egyptians can be involved if it's in their interests. Listen, the Palestinians, the Palestinian issue, when I was in the region before the accords were signed and after, the Palestinian issue was not a primary issue. They were tired of the Palestinian issue and they wanted to advance their interests. But they turned out to be surprised by the street, if you will, their reaction to October 7th and the strength that that has had. I spoke to some of my Saudi colleagues and they told me they were very surprised. They shouldn't have been surprised because they still had been so much anti-Israelism that has been throughout the Middle East, and for that matter, some basic anti-Semitism. It had been changing in Saudi Arabia. I saw it in the UAE, Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in Bahrain, but the people were not totally on board with their those monarchies of where they were. So I believe that people are posturing now, and they really want to see where the United States comes out here. And basically, if they see the United States pressuring Israel to surrender before it has conquered, if you will, Hamas as a future governing and military authority, it will be an indication to them that America is not part of what they see for their own defense for the future. They will turn to others. And so how this multi-dimensional world of the Middle East, what the answer is you need American leadership and bringing Israel in with these countries as a barrier, a wall against Iran, which is their greatest fear.
And of course, as you mentioned before, October 7th, Saudi Arabia seemed closer and closer to normalizing relations with Israel. Hopes around that obviously pushed out by this war. But down the line, your sense of Israel's ability to bring more countries on board the Abraham Accords, especially those concerned, as you say, about the Iranian threat, if you had to put your money on it, which other countries realistically could be contemplating normalizing down the line? Briefly, please.
So the most important would be Saudi Arabia. There was even talk of even the largest, the most populous Muslim nation, Indonesia, joining on. I believe that these possibilities, if you have a timeline that is going to be in years, maybe even decades, this can happen, but it will only happen if the United States takes the lead.
Eric Mandel, founder and director at the Middle East Political Information Network, live from New York. Thank you as always for your insights. Appreciate you being on the rundown. And still in studio, Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangat, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran. Eitan, I'm coming to you. The Iranian threat exists. We're hearing about it. We're hearing from the proxies. We're seeing it firsthand here. Your sense of what this means, broadly speaking, for the region when we look at the Abraham Accords 4 years down the line, what is next?
Abraham Agreement, I think, was the major achievement of Bibi Netanyahu since he has become prime minister from 1996. You know, every prime minister is bringing his legacy. Unfortunately, now the legacy of the war is above all, but this achievement is the main thing that Bibi Netanyahu surprised and made successfully. I think you see it inside the war with the way of the coalition of the defense of the region, that these countries are joining under the umbrella of the United States on defending against Israeli attacks by Iran or by others without talking a lot. Defense is running. Secondly, I think that the big mistake of this agreement that Israel didn't consider seriously the meaning of the Palestinians issue as a part of this agreement, because we know the street much more better than the others and their calculations. And if we were smart enough in order to bring this issue to the table and not try to make surround it, we cannot be aware that those countries cannot continue in their directions without getting from Israel a kind of a process with the Palestinians. Secondly, Saudi Arabia looks to be, as it is said here, on the gate, wants to come inside, but they will not be here. The main question will be the United States policy after the elections in the United States. United States is declaring for a long time on leaving the Middle East area. Leaving the Middle East area is making a great change to what has been achieved till now. But in my opinion, that the relationship between Iran, Russia, the feeling of Iran of getting their goals against Israel even without waiting for the nuclear, completing their program. They are, I think, in a way, thinking that by conventional war, they succeed to get a large part of their goals in order to destroy Israel and to achieve it with this kind of help of Russia. I think the importance of this bloc of moderate countries has a lot of meaning, and we should not, of course, break it, and UAE make it very clear. I think UAE is the most flexible country on it by saying we will not be inside this game without the Palestinians in their places.
There's always been a sense as well, Ariel, that things behind the scenes are a little bit different from what we hear at press conference, and that things in terms of relations aren't as severe, so to speak, as one might seem. Your sense, what are you hearing from your sources?
Well, we have the leadership that has the security interests that align with Israel, but then there's a sentiment on the street that often, especially at times of war, does not align with a pro-Israeli sentiment. Usually it's on the contrary. And the countries that are put most of the tests with this are not the UAE or Saudi Arabia, but Jordan and Egypt, Israel's peace partners. They on a daily basis, especially now in Jordan with the results that we saw in the election, they're all struggling to balance between their national security interests, which align closer to those of Israel than to those of Iran, because Iran is seen as a major threat to them as well. But, and as we saw, I think most, pointedly on during the 2022 Qatar World Cup, the Arab sentiment on the street is not pro-Israel. And I think we saw the Saudis willing to go to some kind of discussions with Israel, saying that they would need to see a viable path to a Palestinian state. Since the start of the war, they've doubled down on that, saying not just that it's a viable path, but they need to see a Palestinian state. They started, the UAE are following course as usually happens. And this, I agree with the interview that you had shortly before us, that this could be just the rhetoric of the present, because at a time of war, the public sentiment is very much pro-Palestinian, especially given the images that you see coming out of Al Jazeera. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change the interests of the leaders. They are hoping to weather the storm, that post-war there will be some viable horizon for these discussions, but obviously the Palestinian issue cannot be swept under the rug like Israel would have liked it to be.
One remark, I think that all this what we speak is one country that will fulfill a major role about the future of this bloc or for this region what will be, and it's Jordan.
Right.
And this is a sign to the others what will be the future of the opportunities here.
Major General in the Reserves, Eitan Dangot, Middle East correspondent Ariel Osurain, appreciate your insights on all these developments across the region. Thank you so much. And talking of Jordan, less than a week after parliamentary elections saw Islamist factions make major gains, the Prime Minister resigns. More in this report by our Alex Schloss.
Jordan's Prime Minister, Bashir Kassaoune, has submitted his resignation less than a week after local parliamentary elections saw Islamist opposition groups make significant gains, though the results fall short of an Islamist takeover of the government. With the pro-government factions maintaining a majority in the 138-member parliament, it has raised fears that an empowered Islamist faction could challenge government policies on free market reforms and broader foreign policy objectives.
Today, what's happening in Gaza is an unprecedented battle, and neither the Jordanian nor Islamic movement can be bystanders. We believe this is an existential battle, not just a normal conflict. The voice of the Jordanian street has been influential in shaping political directions regarding this war.
It comes after a Jordanian truck driver opened fire at the King Hussein Allenby crossing, killing 3 Israelis and causing the border to be shut for 2 days. Thousands of Jordanians were seen celebrating in the streets of Amman following the shooting.
This protest is in support of the heroic act that was done by Maher al-Jazi, and this shows the conscience of the Jordanian people, of their hatred to this Zionist enemy. If they give the chance for the Jordanian people to fight, the Jordanians will do the same of what Maher al-Jazi did and even more, because these criminal enemies are killing children and women every morning and evening.
The U.S. has long assisted Jordan in combating extremist groups in and around its borders, but that deterrence has been focused northward to counter the threats from groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS operating from Iraq and Syria. However, that threat has become increasingly domestic. As Israel's campaign to root out Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank continues, fears have risen in Jordan of a spillover of the conflict, with bad actors looking to exploit the situation for their own gains. The head of King Abdullah's office, Jafar Hassan, is expected to replace Kassaoune according to reports. For Jordan, relations with Israel pose a challenging balancing act, with the kingdom keen to maintain diplomatic and security ties with Israel, while keeping public anger focused away from the king and his government to avoid widespread discontent.
And changing gears, Egypt has for years been deprived of many of its most significant unique artifacts. Our Jody Natilovitz has details.
Prominent Egyptian archaeologist and former antiquities minister Zahi Hawass has launched a petition for the return of the pharaonic bust of Queen Nefertiti from the Neues Museum in Berlin back to Egypt. Nefertiti's famous painted limestone bust was uncovered at Tel El Amarna, around 300 kilometers south of Cairo, in 1912 by German archaeologists, shipping it to Berlin a year later. Amarna was the capital city of Egypt at the time of Nefertiti's husband, 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten, who reigned until about 1335 BC. Akhenaten, called the heretic king, was notorious for promoting the worship of the god Aten to the exclusion of Egypt's other gods. His reign also introduced a radical change in Egyptian art. In his petition launched on Saturday, Hawass asked for the return of the bust, saying it was removed from Egypt illegally after its discovery.
This is the national committee, is not a government committee, to ask for the return of the bust of Nefertiti back. And this is the letter. What I need from everyone here is to go to my website. You will only open the website, hawazzahi.com, and you will sign one signature to show that you really love this bust to come back.
Hawass added that he will not be calling for the repatriation of artifacts that were taken out of Egypt legally.
I think it's time now, year 2024, 2025 should be the year that the African countries and the civilizations of others, artifacts should come back again. I am not asking for the artifacts museums to come back. I'm asking only for 3 main beautiful objects.
These objects are the Rosetta Stone in the British Museum, the bust of Nefertiti, and the Zodiac from the Louvre. The museums are yet to comment.
And that's a wrap for this edition of The Rundown. Back again tomorrow, same time, same place. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching.